Let's begin to build our first model, the production possibility frontier. In a previous section, we decided that the reason that we must make economic choices is because of the scarcity of resources. That means that with every economic choice, there is a foregone option that we call an opportunity cost. If we focus on the choice made and the choice sacrificed, then we're analyzing two variables. So let's suppose that you have 6 hours to study tonight. Of course, you're taking several courses, but let's assume that the next 2 courses that have exams scheduled are economics and calculus. You could choose to spend all 6 hours studying for econ. We'd like that. Or all 6 hours studying for calculus. A calculus teacher would like that. We can plot these points on a model for these possible choices. We would have hours of study for econ on one axis and hours of study for calculus on the other axis. If you choose to study for 6 hours, then there would be no time to spend studying for calculus. So if you study for econ for 6 hours, this is the point that would be relevant. And I can plot it on this model. If you choose, however, to devote 1 hour to studying for calculus, then you would have 5 hours to study for econ, and I can plot that point. This also shows us the opportunity cost of studying 1 hour for calculus. It's the 1 hour of econ studying that was sacrificed. And conversely, for the hour of studying economics, the opportunity cost is 1 hour of studying for calculus that is sacrificed. In this case, the opportunity costs are constant, or they're the same as we move incrementally along this curve. As we move along the production possibilities curve that we've created, you can see that for each point on this curve, all of the time is being used fully for studying. No time is being wasted in other pursuits. Any point beyond the curve would be impossible, given the time constraints. And any point below the curve, let's say 2 hours of studying for econ and 2 hours of studying for calculus, which this point would represent, is possible, but it's less than the maximum use of time for studying. We're analyzing these options incrementally or marginally. Marginal analysis is the basis for economic decision making, and that's because typically we don't make all or nothing decisions. You don't decide to never study for econ or to study every waking moment for econ. You always evaluate the additional benefit of studying econ as compared to the additional cost. Notice that in the case where the cost is the same, you have a linear production possibility frontier. And that shows us that the opportunity costs are constant. We can also use this type of model in a macro sense. Let's think about the production possibilities for an economy like Econoland. The amount that can be produced is determined by the amount of resources and the quality of resources available. Let's create a production possibilities frontier for Econoland. We'll label the two axes as capital goods and consumer goods. Goods and services can be divided into these two categories. And you remember the difference between capital goods and consumer goods from our previous section. As we start to plot points on the frontier, we are assuming that all available resources are being used to the fullest potential. Remember the definition of economic model? A set of assumptions. So here's our first assumption of our model, that all resources are being used to their fullest potential. We also made the same assumption for our model of your choices for studying. Each point on the curve assumed that all 6 hours, the total possible, was used for studying. We also assumed that the amount of resources is fixed and that the level of technology is fixed as we create this curve. So we can plot some points on this generic graph. We can look at a point where all resources are allocated to producing capital goods, and that would be this point. We'll just label it A. And at point A, all resources would be directed for producing capital goods and 0 producing consumer goods, and that's what the point reflects. This is a good place to stress what this model tells us and what it doesn't tell us. It shows us what is possible to produce with a given amount of resources. It doesn't tell us what people want, or it doesn't tell us what a good choice would be, whatever that is. If a society used all resources to produce capital goods, there would be no food produced to feed people with, because that would be consumer goods. So this is probably not a choice that a society would make, but it does exist on our model as a possibility. We can continue plotting points on our production possibility frontier, and for each point, there is an opportunity cost choice, just like there was for the model we created about studying. But in this case, as opposed to the model for studying, where you had constant cost, we probably have a different situation. In the case of capital goods and consumer good production, the resources are not perfectly substitutable for the production of both items. Probably the opportunity cost are increasing for the production of both items. For instance, the skill for producing a robotic assembly line, which is a capital good, is probably not the same skill as needed for producing pizza, which might be a consumer good. Therefore, as we increase production of one, the amount sacrificed in producing the other increases. This will create a production possibility frontier that is concave or bowed out from the origin, like the one that we have here. Remember, any point on the curve represents full use of resources or full employment. And like our model for studying, any production above the curve, like point E that I've identified here, is impossible currently given our assumption about the amount of resources that are fixed. But it's not impossible in the long run. In the long run, with additional resources, with better quality resources or improvements in technology, then that could allow Econoland to produce more of everything, and that could shift the curve outward. This we would refer to as economic growth. Also, any production point below the curve is possible, like the point here. I'll identify it as point F. Not all resources are being used efficiently. There are some resources that are being wasted. When we look at a production possibilities frontier for Econoland, a point below the curve would represent underuse of resources, specifically human resources. This would mean that the rate of unemployment in Econoland is greater than the full employment rate of unemployment. So Econoland would be in a recession. Now you have an understanding of what a production possibility frontier shows you, what it doesn't show you, and we want you to practice with these.